Hi, and welcome to I Want to Know More. This module contains information about how to find out what components are in your home computer system. The utility software we're using today is CPU-Z. It's one of many available utilities downloadable for personal use. CPU-Z is just a simple program that reads your system BIOS and tells you the information on it in a graphical user interface. First up is processor, what's in there. For this particular computer, an AMD quad-core. Code name of the processor is something like what they called the processor while they were still working on it before it was released. These code names tend to hang around and technicians use them. Even as the processor moves along, you've heard of these guys somewhere in the background, maybe a name like Thunderbird or Bulldozer or Ivy Bridge. They're cool and weird names that technicians like to name chips, I guess, while they're working on them. Next up is the wattage. Well, how much wattage does the processor draw? And you can see that this one draws 95 watts. That's kind of in the mid-range. Processors that draw less wattage, of course, use less power and emit less heat. Those are both good, so lower numbers here are better. Next up is the processor package. This is pretty much what socket it fits in on the motherboard, and so this motherboard would be a socket AM3. The technology used, and that is the width of the process they use for making these things. This is 45 nanometers or billionths of an inch. Smaller number here is better. The smaller the little lines are inside the processor means the processor components can be closer together. And because they're closer together, the processor can work faster. So again, smaller is better. This goes through more specifically down in detail about what your processor family is and where it falls. Even though you get a processor that says it's a quad core of a certain speed or type, they may have been manufacturing these for 2 or 3 years. They make multiple changes. This tells you what revisions and where you fall in that line of processors. Of course, next up is the clock speeds of the cores, and we'll be covering this in class in detail. It's a bit much for this lesson, but at least you know what the speeds are. You can look them up. Next up is how much cache is on your chip. And again, in class, we do cover L1, L2, and L3 cache. In this case, more is better. L1 cache is very expensive, so they don't use much of it. As you can see in this case, only 64 kilobytes, not very much. And then L2 and L3 up to 4 megabytes, and on some of the newer chips, a bit more. The main board in this system is a Gigabyte. It has the 990 chipset on it, which is a pretty good chipset. Relatively recent, last couple of years. Memory, this one has DDR3. You can see 8 gigs. The motherboard frequency on this one is 2000. And the DRAM frequency is a bit lower. Things we'll be talking about in class is CAS latency, RAS to CAS latency. All these things are meaningful. In these numbers, lower is better. Meaning how long do you want to wait in clock cycles for the processor to be able to address a column in memory. Serial presence detect is not used on these systems. Graphics card in this one, it's a pretty old, looks like GeForce 240, and that would be from several years ago. And it tells me what that is and what speeds they are. So that's just a general idea of what's on your motherboard. It doesn't give you all the individual components like hard drives or things like that, but the main components, CPU, motherboard, memory, and these are things you'll need to know, and you might want to start learning the ones at home. Download this program to your home computer, fire it up, and see what you got in that thing.